So today's presentation is about the new Ryzen 4000 series mobile processors from AMD. Now these are the latest from AMD for laptop processors, and it's quite an interesting lineup. There are some things that AMD has managed to achieve which is sort of changing the paradigm of how we look at laptops in general and also laptop processors. Up until now, if you had to buy a laptop, right, you had to make hard choices. You had to consider, okay, I want to buy a laptop which has great performance. But typically, what that involved is that it would be a fat machine, because you require that much cooling. And not only will it be thick, but it'll also be heavy. And the other downside would be the battery life, right? When you have a powerful processor, when it's running at max, it drains the battery really quickly. So that was one side of the equation, and then there's the other side where you're saying that I want a thin and light machine, I want a great battery life, but the downside is that you would have to sacrifice some amount of processing power and some amount of basically raw processing power. So these were the choices that we sort of had to live with, and there was no there's no way around it until now. This has been AMD's goal of sort of addressing that. How do you bridge that gap between the two? And the answer to that is the new Ryzen 4000 series processors. So you've got these new processors which are built on the new Zen 2 architecture from AMD and are using a 7 nanometer manufacturing process. Now, 7 nanometer is actually what has allowed AMD to achieve some significant breakthroughs and put some notable features into their new processors, the 4000 series that you'll see. So what is it? What are the two most important things? AMD's tried to address this whole this whole trade-off between you can either have powerful or either have portability, and they've tried to address that and bring the two to a closer meeting point. Now you can have ultra thin laptops with powerful processors in them, and I'm actually really excited about the powerful components in thin and light. We'll get to that in a bit, but so you can have gaming grade machines which are thin and light, don't compromise on battery life. You can have ultra portable machines which don't compromise on performance. You can do light gaming on them, and all of that is basically enabled because the 7 nanometer process is able to put in 20% more transistors in a smaller die area, and you've got essentially the best of both the worlds. So there's that. Now the 7 nanometer advantage to encapsulate, right, the best cores that AMD has ever made. Now the Zen 2 architecture and the 7 nanometer process allow the laptop cores, all of them, to be powerful and battery efficient. You also, for example, now have the world's first 8 core 16 thread processor on a thin and light, and that's what I was really excited about. 8 cores and 16 threads in a thin and light laptop, guys. That's never been done before. AMD is also, of course, claiming that the new Zen 2 architecture on the 4000 series can deliver up to 2x the power efficiency of their components previously. And of course, there's the Radeon graphics on board. We've seen the Radeon onboard graphics perform really well in the previous lineup, but now with the 7 nanometer advantage, you've got, of course, the same level of advancements being applied to the GPU as well. And the direct result of that is benefits for you as a consumer, as a laptop user. What do you get? You've got these super thin, super light machines which are as responsive as you would expect maybe a gaming grade machine to be. Maybe not in all of the heavy duty tasks, but in terms of the responsiveness, boot times, loading applications, things like that. You've also got these machines that are versatile and can double up as entertainment machines. Now if you have, let's say, a 14-inch or a 15-inch laptop and you've got a few friends coming over, you want to watch a movie, you can actually plug the laptop into a TV. If you have a 4K HDR TV, you get a 4K HDR signal out and you can enjoy that content in all its glory. You've also got mobility. Now with mobility, it's not just about the laptop being thin, light, easy to put in your bag. It's also about how you connect with other devices. It's also about the battery life. Just because something is thin and light, but if it has poor battery life, what good is it? You're around all day, out and about, but you can't use it because the battery is dead. So mobility is sort of, mixing all of these different aspects together. You can connect, you have Wi-Fi 6 on board, you have Bluetooth 5 on board. So what that does is that allows your laptop, these Ryzen 4000 series powered laptop, to pair with your Bluetooth device, to pair with, let's say, a hotspot over Wi-Fi 6, and not only get maximum bandwidth throughput through these technologies, but also be battery efficient, right? So it's sort of designed as an overall well-rounded solution to optimize not just performance but also power consumption. So you've got that. And last but not the least, probably like one benefit you gamers are going to enjoy the most is the 45 watt option that you're going to get, and that's in the 8 series. So that's there. So one sec. Now you have the 4000 series, but it is divided up into two parts. AMD's fine-tuned these new 4000 series processors for two very specific use cases. You've got the U series that's designed for thin and light laptops, portability is at the forefront, and you've got the H series, which is designed for gaming. Thin and light, of course, the aspect of gaming is covered. If you're a content creator, you're going to look at the H series. If you're looking to do number crunching, data analysis, anything that's very CPU intensive, you're probably going to turn towards the 8 series. And those are the two primary lineups. But the cool thing is, despite this bifurcation, there are two basic principles that form the foundation of both of these series. One being battery efficiency, as much of it as possible, and as much power of them as possible. So first, let's go over the U series. All right. So the U series has 5 processors under it, and it starts with the Ryzen 3 4300U and goes all the way up to a Ryzen 7 4800U. And you can see on your screen right now, like the core counts on these goes all the way up to the 8 core 16 threads that I was talking about in a thin and light, designed for a thin and light. So you know that despite this monstrous core count, you're still looking at a decent power draw, because again, right, it's supposed to be portable and supposed to be battery efficient as well. So you've got that, and in between you have 2 SKUs of the Ryzen 5, which is essentially looking at 6 core 6 threads in the Ryzen 5 4500U. And if you need better multitasking capabilities and more number crunching capabilities, you've got the Ryzen 5 4600U, which is essentially 6 cores and 12 threads. And that is, again, like, this kind of core and thread count is really impressive, keeping in mind that this is designed for a power efficient system. There's also the Ryzen 7 4700U, which has a more balanced 8 core and 8 thread system with a boost clock going all the way up to 4.1. By the way, the Ryzen 7 4800U can go all the way up to 4.2, and it features 8 Radeon cores. All of these cores, all of this base clock, boost clock, all of this operates within a power envelope of 15 watts to 25 watts, depending on how the OEM decides to configure this chip. So it's actually even versatile that way. Let's say if you buy a Ryzen 7 4800U powered laptop from company A, they could have it pinned at a 25 watt TDP, versus if you bought, let's say, a Ryzen 5 4500U, they could also be configuring it at 25 watt TDP and giving you more performance. So that's sort of what the real advantage of this is. And if you want to know exactly in terms of performance what's right for who, and you guys are all aware of your own use cases, and essentially here's where it starts. If it's light multimedia editing, you want to do, let's say, 1 or 2 Photoshop edits, you want to run a small catalog, let's say you shot a friend's birthday party and you want to edit those photos in Lightroom, you can essentially do that on any of these 3 Ryzen 3, 5 or 7 based machines. Where you start to see the difference is when you move into heavier tasks. Now let's say if you're editing a bunch of raw files from a high megapixel camera, or let's say if you've just shot a wedding, right, and you've got this catalog of thousands of images, That's where you'll start to see the difference between how these applications run between a Ryzen 3 and a Ryzen 5 and even a Ryzen 7 for that matter. And step that up a little bit, let's talk about smooth gaming, 60 FPS and above. That's where you see again the differentiating between Ryzen 3, 5 and 7. The Ryzen 7 series, of course, in the U series lineup is the most powerful, right? That's the simple nomenclature AMD's followed. One second, I'm just gonna get thirsty while talking. I hope you guys don't mind. It's very important to stay hydrated. So the Ryzen 7, of course, is the fastest machine out there. Now AMD was kind enough to share with us this really handy chart. What kind of performance boost can you expect going from the entry level Ryzen 4000 series processor all the way up to the top end? So you've got the Ryzen 3 4300U at one end and the Ryzen 7 4800U at the other end. And look at it this way, between this gamut of processors you can see 110% jump, which is of course up to 110. It's based on internal benchmarking from AMD, but at the end of the day, even to be able to claim a performance boost of this kind, and this is not like a previous generation thing or 2 generations old, this is modern generation, this is the latest, so this is what you can expect. If you're a college student looking for a nice laptop for just to do your assignments and just take notes, type up your documents, do research work, this is probably where you'll find a machine that's the most handy and the most easy to use and easy to carry around. And how does it compare in terms of something that's older? Now let's take a look at the Ryzen 7 4800U, the top of the line U series processor, compared to a 5-year-old AMD FX 8800 chip that's a desktop chip. And just in comparison to that, we're seeing some insane kind of boost. This is a desktop versus a laptop chip. Of course, computing has really come way ahead. Processors have become far more powerful over the years, but at the same time, applications have also become far more demanding. So you have to sort of take that into account as well. And when you do that, you realize that the new Ryzen 4000 series processors are promising some very interesting jumps in the kind of performance you get out of them, all the way from multi-threaded performance to content creation and to something as simple as browsing the web. How many times have we guys opened multiple tabs in our favorite browser and been like, oh no, it's like completely slowed down my system? It is not a light task at all. So web browsers can handle with great ease. Next we have the Ryzen 4000 series, the 8 series processors. These are designed for enthusiasts, gamers, content creators, data analysts even for that matter. And this is where you see raw performance really come forth, even starting with the Ryzen 5 4600H, which has 6 cores, 12 threads, goes all the way up to a 4 GHz boost clock. It's looking at some very impressive performance metrics. And then you go up all the way to a Ryzen 9, the 4900H, 8 cores, 16 threads, 45 watt TDP. Like, this is not holding back at all. If you want raw performance, this is pretty much the best kind of core count you can expect right now in a laptop. 16 threads, 8 cores, awesome, boosting all the way up to 4.4 GHz. But the question is, where do you draw the line between use cases? And that's where you'll have to really fine tune, because of course you can buy the top of the line and be happy. Whatever you throw at the Ryzen 9 4900H may be, the processor will keep up with it no matter what. But is it the most efficient use of the resources, right? So you may not need that much. And that's where you have this little handy chart which tells you that essentially here's what's covered. Like, ultra smooth gaming even on AAA titles is covered by all these chips, whether it's a Ryzen 5, it's a Ryzen 7, Ryzen 9, and a lot of games aren't even designed to take advantage of like all of these cores, right? So we know that most games don't take advantage of more than 2 or 4 cores. You can open up your task manager and see in the processor core count how many of them are being used while you're gaming. It's not a lot. So the Ryzen 5 itself offers enough headroom to take care of whatever titles you may throw at it, accompanying GPU of course permitting. It's only when you start getting into heavier workloads like 3D modeling, or even the idea of while you're gaming you want to stream and record, like for example what we're doing right now, we're streaming this live session, we're encoding it as well, and we're also recording it at the same time. So that sort of thing is sorry about that that sort of thing is where the CPU really needs to be able to keep up with the demands. And that's when the Ryzen 7 comes into play, the Ryzen 7 4800H, or even the Ryzen 9 4900H. So if you're a 3D artist, if you're doing a lot of 3D modeling, renders, if you're working with 8K, even 4K footage, how many of you guys are editing video, by the way? Just a show of hands, if we guys can see in the comments. I'm sure a lot of you are content creators by yourself. When you hit render in your, let's say in Adobe Premiere is not going to load the entire project for rendering into your GPU. It's actually going to use the CPU. It prioritizes the CPU the most. It'll use a part of the GPU though. Therefore, you need the processor to be as powerful as possible. Now, if you have a Ryzen 5, 7 or 9 from the 8 series, it keeps up. You start to see in your task manager, if you open that up while you're rendering, you'll see how many cores are getting used, and there will be all of them. More cores, more threads, the better it is. So for content creators especially, these chips come in handy, and given that they have a configurable TDP of up to 45 watts, they really don't hold back in terms of performance. And if you want to know exactly what level of performance you can expect, here's a comparison of the Ryzen 7 4800H. Okay, not even the 49s or Ryzen 5, the 4800H, the mid tier, compared to a Ryzen 5 3600. Now, the desktop CPU has a 65 watt TDP and the laptop one is at 45 watt TDP. And despite that, according to, now this is again thanks to AMD, they provided us this these numbers on various benchmarks. We see the Ryzen 7 go neck to neck and even best this desktop processor, and that's just impressive. Like, you can carry this kind of performance around in your backpack. How many of you can carry a desktop around in your backpack? Not a lot of us, right? Actually nobody. You wouldn't want to do that, but you have the laptop with this level of performance. So it's desktop level performance in a 15-inch form factor or a 17-inch form factor, whatever you choose to go for, and that's really impressive. But that's not all. It's not just about cores, threads. There's also something very interesting AMD's done, and that's called SmartShift. Now, what happens when you're for example playing a game? Your CPU requires a certain amount of power to be able to do what it is doing, and your GPU requires a certain amount of power to do what it is doing. And both of those components have that power draw capped, right? It goes, let's say GPU can only call for that much X amount of power and your CPU can only call for Y amount of power. And in order to be able to perform better, they will of course need more power. So what happens when you cross that threshold? Most current systems will say, sorry, you're not getting any more power because you're not allowed to. It's a very 0 and 1, very binary system. AMD created SmartShift using a set of AI tools and of course their Infinity Fabric, which connects the CPU of the AMD Ryzen 4000 series CPU with their AMD GPUs, the Radeon GPUs, and they talk to each other. And the algorithms essentially control the power flow. So if there is a part of your game that where your GPU is needed the most and your GPU really requires the power, SmartShift will automatically divert the resources that way so that your GPU is not getting throttled because it can't draw enough power. Same thing with the CPU. If you're doing a 3D render or a video render, CPU needs far more power than the GPU, and SmartShift will shift the power draw accordingly. And that's what really helps this SmartShift get more out of both your CPU GPU combination, because it's doing this in real time. All of this is happening literally as the tasks are happening. So it's a very interesting implementation. It's designed to improve output by up to like 17%, if not more, and it's just something that's very novel. And it's also only been made possible because of this move to the whole 7 nanometer process. Now, moving forward, what can you expect from AMD? AMD is saying that this year there's expected to be about 170 Ryzen based machines in the market, and that's a huge number compared to what they had last year or the year before that. They're saying that there's a 2x growth in gaming notebooks, and there's a lot of demand for power efficient, or rather battery efficient performance machines, and that's sort of what they're achieving through the new the Ryzen 4000 series processors. So it's expected that there'll be a massive influx of Ryzen based machines, and we've already started seeing some of them hit the market. We see the Acer Swift 3 powered by the Ryzen 5 4500U that's just become available in India. We've got the Asus TUF gaming A15 powered by a whole different set of Ryzen processors. You've got the Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7 on this. We're expecting the ROG Zephyrus G14 to be released as soon as possible, I'm guessing. But besides that, we also have the Dell G5 Special Edition, which is powered by both a Ryzen based processor and a Radeon based discrete GPU. We've also got the HP Omen 15 that's expected to be coming to India sometime soon. It's already been announced abroad, so excuse me. So in terms of machine portfolio, there's quite a bit expected in the next few months, and it's going to be very exciting to see how these machines sort of pan out in terms of the performance. But the best part is you guys will have options, and a lot of them. So thank you for sitting through that presentation, and I will take questions now. Feel free to drop them in the chat box and I will address them right away. Okay, let's see. Are there any questions? No questions? Okay, I'm gonna wait a few seconds before the questions start coming in. Okay, so the first question comes from Siddharth, who wants to know what kind of performance difference we can expect in real world applications compared to the previous generation. Very tricky question. Let me try and address that. We can't really talk about performance metrics really because not a lot of testing has happened, but it will really depend on a couple of things. One is, what application are you running? And when I say application, it could be something as simple as, let's say, Notepad versus Photoshop, right? Could be anything. But I'm going to address that in terms of load. So that's one thing. Second thing is the configuration. So if you're comparing Ryzen 7, let's say 3750H from previous generation to this year's Ryzen 7, the 8 series 4800H, that's a huge jump. You can expect, if you're gaming, right, if you're looking at from a gamer's perspective, new Ryzen 4000 series has been designed especially keeping in mind AAA titles, keeping in mind esports, because that's sort of what the goal is for almost everybody. If you're buying a gaming machine, you want that, award-winning level performance. So in terms of a concrete number, I wouldn't be able to tell you that because I haven't tested one out and compared one to the other yet. But what I do know is that it is going to be a notable difference in performance that you will observe. And that is actually a combination of multiple factors, all aided by the new Ryzen 4000 processors. Okay. Dave has a question about the thermals. So now it's very interesting. The Ryzen 4000 series processors have a notably higher TDP. I mean, The Ryzen 7 4800H, by the way, has a TDP of 105 watts, which means 105 degrees, my bad. And 105 degrees is what it can run. It will run till 104 safely, and when it hits 105, that's called the T junction. That's when the machine either shuts the system off for safety or throttles it notably. But 105 degrees is a lot. We've not seen many laptops go that high, at least the ones that we've tested or the ones we've seen in the market right now in the Indian market. So I wouldn't say that you have nothing to worry about, but to give you a proper answer to your question, we're going to have to test a lot of these machines out before we can say whether it's how the thermals really are. But the fact is that AMD does give you a lot of headroom in that sense. Like going all the way to 105 degrees is huge. So let's just leave it at that for now. Guys, if you have any questions regarding the features, I think that's today's session was all about the 4000 series and the features around it. So let's focus on that as well. Okay. Okay. So we have a question about the integrated graphics chip, and okay, how is AMD also working with OEMs to bring their laptops to India? So in terms of what models an OEM brings to India, what sort of SKU, what combinations, that really is up to the brand, and there's a lot of market research that goes into this decision. There's a lot of considerations, and honestly all of that happens in a room that we are not sort of privy to. So on what basis those decisions are made, I would not be able to tell you, but what I can tell you is that all of these guys, AMD, the OEMs, their goal is to bring as many viable options for the consumer as possible. Like, for example, we've seen Asus launch the TUF A15 in so many different SKUs. There's a whole different number of combinations, and they want to bring more, right? So it's not that they're limiting it to, okay, we're only going to do XYZ, but they're trying to go the whole route. In terms of the integrated graphics chip, all Ryzen CPUs come with Radeon graphics baked in, and depending on the processor, it will be a different grade of Radeon graphics, different core count, and you can look at the specifics in we'll make this deck available so you can check it out in that. So I hope I've answered that question of yours. I'm actually very surprised nobody has questions around SmartShift. Okay, other questions? Happy to take them. Okay, this is the best question of all. I love a question like this. What processor should you buy for best gaming? The Ryzen 9. The 4900 is, go for it. No, it really depends on what level of gaming and what kind of games you're playing, right? If you're playing something like Call of Duty, if you're playing something like an MMORPG, your needs will differ. Some games are more GPU bound versus some games being CPU bound. Having a more powerful CPU is always great, but you may not ever need it for gaming. So it really depends on the game. Personally, I would feel that the Ryzen 7 4800H is a very sweet spot in terms of the number of cores, number of threads, the clock speeds, all of that. So really does come down to what games you play. If you can give me a list of the games you're wanting to play on your laptop, then maybe I can give you a more a more specific answer. But the 8 series is pretty much what you're looking for. Okay, Mayank has another question which is very similar and a little more specific. So Mayank wants to know, can we play games, record and stream on a Ryzen 5 4600H, and can we do both editing and gaming? So Mayank, to answer the first part of your question, can you game, record and stream? Depends on the settings that you're streaming at. So if you want to do 1080p, you should be able to do all three of them without any problem. Of course, your internet permitting and whatever stream settings you've chosen, those will be specific as well. With regards to editing and gaming, I'm assuming you're not doing both at the same time. I hope you're not doing both at the same time. But yes, you can definitely edit. You can pull in 1080p footage into whatever editing software you use. I personally use Premiere, so I have a lot of experience with Premiere. So that's what I'm going to talk about. But if you even want to do 4K edits, believe it or not, a Ryzen 5 can do it. There are ways you can configure Premiere to work with very high resolution video files without taxing your system, and a Ryzen 5 can more than easily handle that. The editing will not be the tricky part, it will be the rendering. That's where you'll, more cores, more threads, and more higher. So the higher the core count, the higher the threads, and higher the clock speeds, the faster your video renders. So it's just a matter of, whether if your 5-minute video will render in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So it's just that. Okay, can I run Far Cry 5 in higher settings in 60 FPS on a Ryzen 5 4600H, I'm assuming? And honestly, I haven't tested that laptop or any laptop with that processor, so I would not be able to give you an answer on that. Because here's the thing, I'm okay telling you that I don't have the answer to something than to make something up. So it's more important for me to give you guys the correct information, and if I don't have it, but you know what, I'm going to get in touch with AMD. We're going to try and get a Ryzen 5 base system in the lab. We're going to test it out. We're going to give you all of the answers you're looking for. Tell something about SmartShift. It's very smart. No, so the idea of SmartShift is actually pretty interesting because your laptop will come with like a 180 watt adapter or a 230 watt adapter, and what happens to all that excess voltage, or that excess wattage rather? What is not being used by the CPU. Let's say if your CPU is configured at up to 45 watts of TDP and your GPU can go up to 125. Now your GPU is already hitting that 110, 115 mark, but your processor is sitting only at 20 watts. What happens to the rest of power, right? It's not going anywhere. Traditionally, it will not be moved from here to here or vice versa. The idea is with SmartShift that because AMD's got this Infinity Fabric technology built into their AMD's Radeon and AMD Ryzen chips, they are able to talk to each other at blazing fast speeds, and there's an AI algorithm that works in the background to sort of continually evaluate what sort of workload is being given to the CPU and GPU, and it tunes the power delivery accordingly. So it's literally, it sounds very simple, but it's super complex to apparently achieve, because if it was easy, we would have seen it already. How big a deal is 7 nanometer in comparison to other processors? It's a pretty big deal. The smaller it gets, the bigger the deal it is, no pun intended. But the 7 nanometer so up until now we've been stuck on far bigger manufacturing processes like 14 nanometer or even bigger at 21 in the past, right? The more you miniaturize, the more power efficient your components get just by virtue of that miniaturization. But because that process has also become smaller, now imagine you've got the same area that your die is going to cover, but your node can either be 7 nanometer, 10 nanometer, or 14 nanometer. Okay, think of a room. You live in a room where you can have either 50 people be fitting in because they're all very healthy, fit, slim, or you can have 10 very obese people. Like, no offense, but it's sort of like that. With the 7 nanometer process, the nodes become smaller and smaller, so AMD is able to fit more of them in the processor, and therefore the more nodes, the better the performance output, the more calculations it can do, the higher it can go in terms of clock speeds, etc. So there's like a whole bunch of improvements that come just by virtue of miniaturization. So it is a pretty it's a notable deal. Like we have seen the jump noticeably because of the fact that AMD's moved to the 7 nanometer process. So it is a big deal. How big of a deal exactly? If you want a quantifiable answer, wait a few months, let us test out a bunch of these Ryzen 4000 series machines and we'll tell you about that. Okay, comparing last generation Ryzen 7 versus the new Ryzen 5. again, I haven't tested. Oh my god, I would love to give you guys the answer. I want the answer to this myself. The new Ryzen 5 versus the old Ryzen 7. Objectively, on paper, it is going to be very comparable. That's my educated guess. Since I haven't used a Ryzen 5 4000 series based laptop, I wouldn't be able to give you an answer to that. But the idea is that the new Ryzen 5s will deliver far better performance than what Ryzen had to offer previously, the Ryzen 3000 series. So yeah, I see a lot of questions around the Ryzen 5. That's very good, and we're going to definitely get you all of these answers. Okay. My subscribers who are from engineering background have questions regarding KTI and SolidWorks. Okay. Which processor would be best for them? Gaming is not a priority, mostly software and productivity. And that's a question from Abhijit. Katia and SolidWorks, both of them are more CPU intensive than they're GPU intensive. They do tax both the components, yes, but you need a good processor with a high core count, definitely high thread count, and of course the clock speed matters in terms of how quickly you can get the final render out or the final data dump out. So the best of the best, Ryzen 9 4800H, because it just has the maximum amount of power throughput by virtue of the TDP, the core count, the clock speeds. But you will, if you want to balance that out with something that's a little more college student friendly, maybe you want something that's thin and light as well, you could also consider a Ryzen 7 based 8 series, again not the U series, but you could go with the Ryzen 7 8 series based laptop. Now here's the cool thing, the performance chips, right, the 8 series processors are also making their way into thin and light gaming laptops. Now thin and light is being defined by the brands themselves. This is not AMD dictating that, but for example the G14, the ROG Zephyrus G14 comes with a Ryzen 7 and a Ryzen 9 option, and it's considered a thin and light gaming laptop in a 14-inch form factor, and it's delivering on all of the promises of the performance, the core counts, the threads, the clock speeds, everything, but still has a slim chassis. So you do have that option as well, and it's a fairly light machine too. So it's not that you have to go with the Ryzen 9 and therefore it becomes bulky and it becomes thick and heavy, all of that. No, you could have something thin and light as well. So a Ryzen 7 8 series or a Ryzen, if you can go for the Ryzen 9, go for it, all out. But if you have to pick something that's a little more balanced and that's a little more pocket friendly, a Ryzen 7 would be a good choice. Does SmartShift only work with discrete Radeon graphics or with NVIDIA GPUs too? That's from Dave. Dave, it only works with Radeon graphics, not with NVIDIA. Sorry about that. Not my choice, AMD. But when you have control over, AMD has no control over the way NVIDIA decides their GPUs draw power, right? It doesn't. But they have full control over they have full control over every aspect of a Radeon GPU's behavior. And when you have that level of control, you can actually therefore decide the rules of how power draws will work. So that is why it's only between AMD CPU and AMD GPU. And in the ideal world, SmartShift would be applicable to everything, irrespective of what the processor is and what the GPU is. But when that happens, will it be as efficient as AMD to AMD? Perhaps not, So that's the long way of saying it only works with AMD's discrete Radeon graphics, and it's for a good reason. Okay, HP Omen 2020 AMD variant, when is the launch in India scheduled? From Adil. Adil, I would love the answer to that question as well. I'm actually really excited about the new Omen series laptops. They look great. They're powered by Ryzen. It's really nice to see that there's more Ryzen choices this year, and there is no word on when they'll launch. All we know is that they've been announced internationally, but nothing on India. I have Asus TUF gaming laptop. Should I upgrade to new 4000 series? Well, it wouldn't hurt to have a better machine, so you could always upgrade. But the question is, do you think your games are not running good enough, or do you think that your edits are not fast enough? If that is the case, then yes, moving over to a 4000 series will definitely help. But if everything is working fine on your existing machine, then I'm not really sure if you should do that right away. But yeah, it would be great. Any other question? I see a lot of you sending requests to take over the screen. Guys, it's not going to happen. The screen is mine. This screen is also mine, and that screen is also mine. You cannot have my screens. But I will take all your questions. So please go ahead. Keep sending them. Keep sending them. All right. More on SmartShift, perhaps. Which processor will give better or equal performance than upcoming PlayStation 5? Oh my god. Not sure. Because right now there's not a whole lot known about the actual throughput of the PlayStation 5, simply because we have raw numbers, but we don't have frame rates, exact resolutions and things like that. Yes, it can, and Sony says that you can go up to 4K, 120, all of that, but will it actually meet that? Remains to be seen. So I would leave that out right now. Somebody asked, AMD 4th gen desktop processors launching in CES 2021. Bro, I don't even know if there's going to be a CES 2021. Like, this whole corona situation is kind of throwing that off. But as far as the 4th gen desktop processors are concerned, no clue. Currently, this is a session about the Ryzen 4000 series mobile processors. So let's talk about that. Yeah, so let's take more questions on the Ryzen 4000 series mobile processors. Any more questions? Okay. All right. When can we expect Ryzen 4000U series budget laptops? Actually, friend, the 4000U series laptops are already making their into their way into the market. You've got the Acer Swift 3 that's already out. It's got a Ryzen 5 4500U, so 4000U series. So you've got that. So that's one, and we expect other OEMs to also bring in more in the coming future. And somebody asked a question about SmartShift being available on just laptops or desktop also. It's currently a laptop feature, guys. So yeah. Then, okay, somebody's asking, tell me about gaming plus streaming performance. It gives same performance like last gen or give more extra frames, and how many FPS I can get extra. So yes, you will have better performance with this generation, but it really depends on a few factors. One, what are you exactly comparing it to? If you're comparing a Ryzen 7 from the previous generation and a current generation Ryzen 5, maybe the extra performance you're getting is not a whole lot. But if you're comparing previous generations Ryzen 7 with the current generation Ryzen 7, then the performance difference will be much greater. In terms of exactly how many frames per second that is going to be, that's only something that we will be able to know after testing it. And there's so many different conditions that will apply, like what kind of quality are you encoding or streaming at? That's a big factor. And what kind of games you're playing, that will be another big factor. Are you playing a game that is CPU bound? Are you playing a game that is more reliant on your GPU and leaves the CPU to sort of idle around? So a lot of factors involved, but yes, the general consensus is that the modern day Ryzen 4000 series processor will give you a far better, will give you better output than what was previously achievable on Ryzen processors from the previous generation. Excuse me. Is recording session? We are recording this session, yes. In terms of, okay, so we have a question that's talking about, you know, the pricing with the 4500U and the 4600H. You know, pricing is something that OEMs decide. It's up to them. AMD has no control over it. We have no control over it. So at the end of the day, it's up to you. What do you want? You're paying for a specific need. If your need is thin and light, you will figure out whether the cost is justified or not. If you need performance, then you will figure out how much it costs, and you will figure out how to justify whether it's okay or not. So it really is, it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's not really a fair thing to compare. All consumers are waiting for AMD laptops. Can you request OEM and brands to launch them in India as soon as possible? Believe me, I do that every week. We're all very excited about these new systems. There's a lot of new technologies involved, and this is probably the first time in a long time that we have machines with a far smaller the whole 7 nanometer thing going on, right? And that contributes to a performance metric that is different from what was previously seen. So we are very excited about testing it out for ourselves, and therefore, we're constantly requesting brands to, sort of get faster at their launch cycles. But I think because of the lockdown and because of this whole coronavirus situation, that sort of the launch cycle had slowed down, but it's starting to pick up. Which processor is best for RTX 2060 Super or 2070? I'm assuming you're talking about the laptop variants of these GPUs, and we've seen Asus pair the Ryzen 7 4800H with the RTX 2060, so I think that will be a good pair. I haven't tested that laptop. I haven't really tried it out. The one I have right here is powered by the Ryzen 7 4800H paired with the 1660 Ti. So it gives good impressive performance, right? But when you have a better GPU, I think the Ryzen 7 was not bottlenecked over here at all. So I think the Ryzen 7 paired with the 2060s will be a great combination. It'll also be one of those well balanced component configurations. But that's just a hypothesis. I'm dying to test it out, and if anybody from brands are watching this, please, more Ryzen based laptops and fast. Dell's G5 SE, when is it coming? I have no clue. Dell is yet to make any sort of announcement with regards to its availability or pricing in India, so AMD again does not have any control over it. That's completely up to Dell, and it'll happen when it happens, unfortunately. But we do expect it to be sooner than later. So yeah. Will these processors be pocket friendly? I think it's not the processor as much it is going to be the whole laptop. It'll really depend on the specs you're getting. If you start throwing in a higher NVMe drive, a higher capacity NVMe drive, you start throwing in a higher refresh rate display, maybe a higher end GPU, you will end up paying more, given, let's say, assuming the processor is the same. Let's say if it's the Ryzen 7 4800H, and then you have this laptop with a 300 Hz display and like a 2070 Super, whatever, right? Versus a more modest configuration where you have the Ryzen 7 4800H with a 2060 512 NVMe, 144 Hz panel or a 240 Hz panel, that will be cheaper. So it's not really about the processor itself. That's the cost determination factor, but it's also a lot of other components. So I think it'll have to be an overall picture in terms of what is the configuration that you're looking at. So guys, we have time for maybe 2-3 more questions. We are going to end the session at 6. It is 5:56, so ask away if you have any more questions. I know there's a lot, like this thing keeps scrolling, but we're going to be a little more. We'll just have time for 3 more. So let's see if there's any more questions regarding the AMD Ryzen 4000 series processors. Okay. So somebody's asking how many Ryzen 4000 based laptops in India in the next 2 months. So currently we have one product lineup from Asus. This has about 4 or 5 different models. I'm not really sure, but it's somewhere in that range. Acer has the Swift 3. So that's 2 brands that have models in the country. And in the next 2 months, I'm hoping it grows. I'm hoping that Dell, HP, Lenovo, everybody brings their machines as well to the market. But honestly, we have no information about the launch cycles, so it really is dependent on the brand. So hopefully far more, but if not, then we still have a good selection right now. There's a question regarding heating issues. Now, heating issues is a very interesting topic to cover, because it's just physics. When you run current through something, the energy that cannot be converted is released as heat. So you have heat as a byproduct of pretty much every electrical process. So it is very natural for things to get warm. When you use your phone, by the way, if you've got a smartphone, you start taking video or you're on a long call, you'll notice that it gets warm. That's when the battery is depleting. The energy that cannot be converted is changes to heat. So coming to the Ryzen 4000 series processors, now the TDP on these things, sorry, not the TDP, my bad. The maximum temperature you can push some of these chips to is 105 degrees, and that's like, you would really have to choke the vents and do a lot of mismanagement to get the CPU to run that hot and then shut down. At least from the Ryzen 7 based laptop, the tough gaming A15 that we've seen, that's not been the case. It's run at fairly modest temperatures, well within the comfortable range of what the CPU can handle, and of course has maintained surface temperatures also at a fairly low level. So we've got that. There is no throttling. One thing to be okay, so when you talk about heating issues, something can get very hot, and it can be a problem in one of two ways. Either it's getting so hot that you can't type on it, or you can't keep it in your lap, or you can't touch it, or the other thing that will happen is that it's getting so hot that the CPU starts to throttle. And if neither of those two things are happening, then it's fine, right? If your CPU is not throttling, means it's working at its best, and if the surface is not hot enough that you think it's lava, then it's fine. So I think we really need to have a conversation about how we define heating problems, and we'll do that in a separate video. But for now, it's not anything to be worried about, especially because given the fact that it's a 7 nanometer process, smaller chip and smaller die, so therefore there is lesser heat generated in the first place. So yeah, and there's of course somebody is requesting us to test the U series and the 8 series and compare them. We will do that in the course of this next few months as we get machines, and you'll of course be able to see all of that on our website when that happens. So with that, we're going to close today's session. Thank you guys for joining us. It is 6 p.m. and it's been lovely talking to you guys about the new Ryzen 4000 series processors. If you have any questions, you can obviously write into us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you guys, and have a lovely evening.